You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Deep Dive podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Conant, and today we're going to do a deep dive into Copilot. So as you know, I spend a lot of my time just talking to brands. Everybody's being pushed to use AI more and more and more, including myself. And what I'm trying to do, I spend a lot on ChatGPT, but we are a Microsoft house. And so Copilot is there. And there's just, in conversation I'm having, like tons and tons and tons of questions. So what's the best way to use it? How are people using it? What am I missing? And so I got connected with Will Nelson over at Microsoft. And I think this is pretty much what he does all day, is train people on this space. But Will, I'm going to kick it over to you. If you want to give some background on yourself and what you're doing and all that fun stuff before we get into the conversation, that'd be awesome. And then I'm probably just going to pick your brain for like 30 minutes straight. That's
beautiful. Let's do it. And we can run long. Aaron, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. Like you said, I spend all day working with people who are all along their AI transformation journey. I am a Copilot lead in what we call the Copilot Lounge or the Copilot Lab at Microsoft. So I bring in executives all day and sit down with them, do a little bit of sort of, hey, here's what AI is, here's what Copilot is, here's how this stuff works, here's why you can trust it. And then we've got, just like elementary school, we've got a laptop cart in the back. We pull out laptops and actually go hands-on and give people a chance to experience it and see it. The other part of my job, which is equally fascinating, is a part of a showcase sort of lab experience where we have all kinds of cool stuff, from holograms to projector mapped rooms to video walls. And so I get to walk people through and talk about how, in that case, particularly federal executives are solving problems, both novel and evergreen, with technology. So I've gotten to see a ton of fascinating use cases from a lot of different people solving problems with technology, and particularly with AI. So super excited to dive in. This is what I do. This is the stuff I get excited about. So really glad to get to jump in with you about it.
Yeah, how did you get there in the first place? I mean, you think about everything anybody could go to school for. It's just so crazy how much has changed. And then you end up in a spot that's the cutting edge. And you're at Microsoft with Copilot, which is used by, hundreds of millions of people. Yeah. Like, how did you get there? And then I think we'll jump in, because I'm just fascinated. It's cool. My oldest is off. He's a second year in college now. And so you're trying to figure out, like, how do people end up at different spots? I'd love to hear that a little bit. And then for sure, I'm sure most people want to hear, the Copilot stuff as well. But
Copilot's definitely more interesting than I am, but I'll start with a little bit more of my background. So as I'm sure you're familiar, it basically is always somebody you meet along the way by happenstance. And this was a gentleman I'd gotten to know through a mutual friend at a party he was having. He was in a different situation, and talked with him for a little bit, talked about what I was working on. At that point, I was at an InsurTech, an insurance technology company that was working on actually utilizing AI in insurance pricing, and really was enjoying that. That was while I was in college, actually. I was spending about 30 hours a week with them. And he and I just really hit it off, and we'd been looking for opportunities to work together for a while. And he came into this space as a presenter on the transformation side, and then said, hey, we're standing up this Copilot thing. I think we need somebody that is really involved in this technology and knows the space and wants to talk about this stuff all day. Like, we want somebody who just wants to do this all day. And he knew that was really where I was. So met with the team, got pulled in, and coming up on a year now in this space. So I've gotten to see hundreds or thousands of people through this experience, and it's really been incredible. So as always, the dots don't really ever make sense in foresight, but in hindsight, you can see this sort of random, assorted, convoluted bounce around that ends you up in a really interesting place. So I'm super happy where I'm at. And shout out to Dan if you're listening. Thank you for everything.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it is too cool. So if we jump into like Copilot, like, walk us through, like, how do you think of it compared to like ChatGPT?
Yeah.
These different tools that people can use in their job as a whole, Perplexity, Claude, whatever it might be. Like, how do you view all of those holistically? And then, how do you view Copilot? How does it fit in? I'd love to hear some of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that I think is not necessarily clear at first. If you just start using these tools, they don't feel super differentiated. And part of the reason for that is that I think, and I'll jump out at the beginning here, I speak for myself, not Microsoft. Obviously, I'm informed by Microsoft and I'm a little bit biased, but speaking for myself, I think we're probably moving towards a broadly model agnostic world where the very best from OpenAI, from Google, from Anthropic, from Grok, DeepSeek, any of these guys is going to be really, really good and pretty close in quality. So at Microsoft, we sort of look at like there's a continuum of complexity and interaction level from no code all the way up to pro code tools. So we start out with like Copilot Chat, which is probably what you're familiar with, which is just a sort of interaction tool that is much closer if you open it up and feel to the ChatGPTs, Geminis, Anthropics of the world. And then you move up into Copilot Foundry and some of these other tools where, like in Copilot Foundry, we have 1,100 models available. So you can go in and build something using OpenAI models, obviously, or Gemini, DeepSeek, Grok, any of the other models. So we're moving towards that world where we go, hey, you can use what you want. But when we come down and where we spend most of our time, or my time rather, is focused on the Copilot chat experience and how it's integrated into the M365 suite. For that, we are trying to make the tool as usable and as approachable as possible. In order to do that, we don't have a model picker, right? We don't want Aaron to have to spend his time thinking about, well, what model does better on this or that or the other. We really think about Copilot chat as an AI orchestrator. So I'll dive into a little bit of depth here. And if I get too deep, call me out.
I do want to go deep, but I'm just going to, so as I'm pulling this part is when you're looking at it, you say, hey, it's going to pretty much be normalized. They're all pulling information from the World Wide Web, right? And so all of it should be the same if it's using the same information. Now, where it's pulling it from might be different spots right now. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this is how I rationalize it in my head. Yeah. So some differentiation right now, as all of these different platforms are trying to figure out what's the best place to
where is
pull
the untapped
information
data
from.
And the next depth on that is actually something called synthetic data, where you are having AI actually generate data to train itself or train the next version of the model, because you can say, hey, I want this kind of data specifically. And a lot of that may not exist in the world. And so we talk about like one-shot models and some of these other things that I won't get too deep into, where you can just give something one example, and then it will go generate 10,000 iterations of that using AI, train itself on that, and you can just give it one. And all of a sudden you have a model that's actually really pretty well tuned on one specific skill or type of data or type of information. So that's part of it. There's sort of two sides. There's the data side, which there's a lot closer to parity on. And then there's the actual underlying technology and how are you tokenizing, transforming, building all the diffusion layers. Like there's a lot of the technical stuff that there is still differentiation, and there will continue to be differentiation, right? Like we are not all going to end up at the exact same end spot. I don't know if you or your listeners are familiar with the concept of carcinization. This is sort of a niche internet topic of the idea that if you look at deep sea wildlife, almost everything is evolving over thousands of years towards being a crab, because it turns out the form of a crab is like kind of just the best for being a deep sea creature. So if you look at everything that all started pretty disparate, they're all slowly evolving towards the form of a crab. They're getting claws, they're getting hard outer shells. So there's a little bit of that happening in technology. Like you see this with smartphones, right? Like we don't see a whole lot of smartphones that look wildly different these days. The flagship from Samsung, the flagship from Apple, the flagship from Google look broadly similar. And that's because we've gotten really close to like, this is what an optimal smartphone looks like. And maybe there's some crazy folding phone or the next generation battery, but we're starting to get pretty close. So that's, and I don't want to overstate it. There is differentiation in models right now, right? Like there are differences between models, and that will continue to be true.
But it will slowly get, I mean, there is,
I believe, it's going to converge over time, and it may end up, and I don't know if this is, 1 year, 5 years, or 15 years, where I would guess the top 3 or 4 models will be differentiated by 1-2% to the point where it really matters on what you're doing. One might be a little better at coding, and one might be a little better at prose, and one might be a little better at translation or something for that.
So I shouldn't, because a lot of it right now, we did a full day event in New York, right?
Yeah.
And part of it was around, AI innovation, primarily around paid media and Amazon advertising and everything. And then we got into a little bit around these LLMs. And it's like, oh, well, I use Perplexity for this and Grok for this. And but then people are walking away like, wow, do I need to go with 4 of these? And the reality is like, what I'm hearing is, no, actually, you could probably, if you want to, go ahead if you're that much into it, but you're probably going to be okay with picking one.
Pareto principle, right? You're going to get probably 80% of the quality out. Now, there are some specialized use cases, right? If you are getting super deep into just code, or you're getting super deep into voice to text, like there are edge cases. And like I said, right now, we aren't at that convergence point. I think we're moving towards it, but we're not there yet. So right now, I think for the average user, you are fine using whatever model is most accessible. Obviously, I'm biased towards Copilot, and I can talk a little bit about some of the background in Copilot and what that actually means, because Copilot itself is not a model, right? And we can talk about the structure of Copilot and what actually Copilot is as a tool versus
we
an
should
LLM.
do that, because I think people are seeing it as a model.
Yes, and I think that's true. So the way we think about Copilot is actually closer to an AI orchestrator. And when I say Copilot, I'm going to speak about Copilot Chat here, which is the tool you would interact with if you just click the Copilot button in most of the Office. Sometimes you'll see other sidebars and things, but that's what you're interacting with is a sort of base Copilot where you don't have a model picker. We think about it as an AI orchestrator. So what it is doing is taking your request, taking your prompt, and then saying, what can I do to fulfill Aaron's intent? What can I do actually to get him a great response that's going to make him happy? And it goes back and forth with an LLM, and then it pulls in data and tools and context you've given it to try and respond. What happens with a raw LLM, like we were talking about my computer before we set up. I've got a powerful computer sitting right here that is like way overkill for this Zoom call. But what it allows me to do is run LLMs on silicon. I can run an LLM totally locally without having to use cloud compute. It was actually an underwhelming experience the first time I did it. It's a really impressive technology. LLMs are great, but they aren't that useful of a tool when they are not instantiated with your data, your context, the tooling that they need to surround that. You just kind of get text back and it doesn't necessarily have any grounding towards you. We'll talk a little bit about like meta prompting, which is something that all of the LLM tools that you're familiar with, if you're not running directly on silicon, are doing. So they're putting around your prompt, they're saying, hey, you are a helpful AI assistant. Do not hallucinate. Do not lie. Do your best to give a good answer. Use structure. Don't use run-on sentences. Reply to the user in a similar tone to which they respond, which they give you. And then your prompt comes in, and then it responds using all that additional context that you as the user will never see until you get to use a silicon or an LLM running raw on silicon that doesn't have all that. And you go, this is kind of a like flat feeling tool. It doesn't have the same impact. So back to Copilot. Copilot is really an AI orchestrator that is going to take your prompt, try and understand the intent, and that uses an LLM to do that. In most cases, it's OpenAI's 4.0. We're doing some experimenting with 4.1 and 4.5, so this may get changed in the future. But broadly, we're going to be using the best from OpenAI for the next at least while. And then it's going to pull in your data, and we'll talk about what that means when I say your data, your context, and tooling. Like we all know that early LLMs weren't very good at math. So it may say, hey, this is clearly a math question. I need a calculator, because it's trying to understand that intent. It's not just going to hit the LLM and then give you its best response, which would just be whatever it comes back with token wise. It's going to say, no, in order to fulfill this request, I need a calculator. Let me spin up a calculator. Let me dump this in, extract the information I need, and then respond with that. So that's when we think about this orchestrator model versus Copilot is not just a model. It is that orchestrator tool.
So in work, I'm going to separate two things, right? Because I ChatGPT, I use it all the time. But if I'm working at work, I should always use Copilot because is that kind of the recommendation there? And I know it would seem like bias coming from you, but I don't take it as biased. I'm taking it as like, I actually want the best return to me. And I don't care which platform I'm asking it from. Absolutely. But why would I just
you're already model agnostic, right? Like you're already there where you go, I don't care what model I'm asking. I want the best responses.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going for as well, right? That's why there's not a model picker. We're going, the user doesn't care about the model, right?
They don't.
This is similar when people talk about advertising,
don't want
right?
to care.
You sell the feature. Like you don't sell the spec, you sell the feature. So I would broadly say yes. And let me tell you why. Because if I just say yes, use Copilot all the time, I am employed by Microsoft, right? Like that's not a hard sell. Let's talk about why. There's a couple of things. One, I spend a lot of time with federal government executives, and this is a big concern for them. But if you are using a third-party tool, this is not to say they're all insecure. Many of them have good privacy policies, but you don't know what their privacy policy is. And even if you do, you don't know that it reflects your particular organization's stance on data protection, data sort of retention, and all these other things. So if you're in Copilot, your IT organization has the ability to get very granular with the controls. And critically, it is within your Microsoft secure tenant. You'll hear me say tenant a lot. You can think about that as the Microsoft account for an organization, not a person. So Microsoft as a company has one Microsoft tenant. Every company that uses Microsoft has one tenant. Copilot exists within your tenant. So when you ask a question to Copilot, when you get a response, that never leaves your tenant. So your data with Copilot is your data, is your data, is your data. Microsoft doesn't see on it. We don't train on it, and it doesn't leave your tenant. There's one tiny little asterisk on that, which I'll get to in a second. But your sort of security posture will be reflected in how your Copilot is set up. So that's one reason why it's can be very valuable to say, hey, anything with work, we're going to be doing, especially if you have sensitive data.
And I'm an executive at a company. And I mean, I'm not a big shop. We're a team shop, right? We're a Microsoft shop. I am in and saying, hey, team, you're at work doing work things. You're at home traveling. You're doing work. You're using Copilot on that tenant for that reason. It's a security issue.
Exactly. So that's one, is the data governance and the security. So that's like from a sort of organizational side, you as the like individual user might not really care that much, right? About like, oh, I don't care about the retention policies aside from that I might get in trouble. But here's why it actually is valuable, is that because it's in your tenant, we are able to index the entirety of that tenant and make that available to you. So when you ask a question, you can go to Copilot and say, hey, summarize last week's communications with my manager. You don't need to tell Copilot who your manager is. You don't need to copy and paste your emails or your Teams chats, anything else in. It is instantiated within Copilot. We do what is called a semantic index of your tenant, and that is reflected. You also can call any document within your tenant using a slash or an email. So you can say, hey, please help me understand this RFP or this RFI or this particular document, this charter document even. And you can say, help me understand, and then put in a slash and then the name of the document. It'll search it up for you, pull that in, and you don't have to go grab that document, copy and paste it, dump it into that context window. We're going to do that automatically. So there's a massive benefit in terms of, we talked about, these tools get more valuable when they have your data and your context. That's what Copilot does. And that's one of the pure, like really critical elements, is that it is instantiated with your data and you don't have to bring that data to it. So this is like one thing, this was a takeaway that we had. Microsoft does something called the Work Trends Index every year, where we survey, I think it was like 32,000 people across a whole bunch of countries. We look at M365 usage, we look at LinkedIn, and we say, how is work changing? And one of the takeaways was that 80-something% of people are bringing their own AI to work. And we saw that stat and we said, no, you wrote that backwards. People are bringing their work to AI, right? You are taking your context and bringing it out. And so like that's a friction point that shouldn't exist. That is something you shouldn't spend your time doing. Is like, all right, I got to go find these 8 emails that had to do with this project, copying it all, dumping it into the context window, then getting back an answer. You can say, Copilot, I want to know everything on Project Peregrine. And it's going to go grab those things, pull it together, and then have that for you because it's instantiated in your tenant and it's integrated. You talked about being a Microsoft shop. You've got that already there. So it integrates into your tooling.
No, I love it. I'm going to say, when I think of the, these notions, which I love this topic, is we're removing right now, is this thought that like Copilot, because it's not, a chat GPT, right? Because it's not a Perplexity, whatever it is, that it's not going to be as good. Yeah.
It's running on the latest, well, not necessarily the latest and greatest, but it's running on the best models from OpenAI. Like it is underpinned by the same technology. It is not ChatGPT, right? Like it's not one-to-one. Microsoft has our own tuning. We have our own, we talked about meta prompting. Like it is not one-to-one, but it's very, very close. I have seen, frankly, I think it is equivalent in quality. Again, I'll be transparent and not speak for Microsoft. This is Will Nelson. Sometimes ChatGPT might be a little bit better in their quality of answers. Sometimes Copilot, I would say it probably ends up about a wash. And then when you add in all of that context of my environment, I have the ability to reach for whatever I want, right? Like within Microsoft, I get access to a lot of cool tech. I can reach for any of the LLMs I want. I go back to Copilot time and time again. And that's not because anybody's looking over my shoulder checking my usage. That's because that is the tool that is most valuable to me. When I go into a meeting and say, hey, I'm meeting with these people. Have I ever interacted with this person before? And it's going to go back, pull a bio from them and say, hey, you sent them 2 emails 6 months ago, and you guys had some Teams chats about this meeting that you both attended a little while ago, because it has that data. So that then pushes it ahead. Even if there is a differential in quality, having that data is a massive, massive shift for me.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it. We do a lot of surveys to stay on top of the trends, right? That's how we get the topics for the webinars or the dinners or anything that we do. And to pull in all that data, tried to use ChatGPT multiple times, and it almost got there over and over again. And so my oldest, I gotta say, and he's an intern right now. Yeah. He's like, try Copilot. And so I just all right, why not? Because I was a little apprehensive for whatever reason.
Yeah.
so thankful for this conversation today. I dropped it in there. It's the experience that you talk about. Like, it literally gave me the answer.
Yeah.
It took, and then I could just interact, and it just kept reiterating for exactly what I wanted. It got it right every time.
Yep.
And I gave up on ChatGPT. And it's not that ChatGPT is not going to get better. It's just wasn't quite there. And maybe it's because it wasn't pulling all the data. I don't know the reasons behind it.
Yeah.
I was.
It's
maybe there will be one where Copilot doesn't work and it'll go the other way, but
it is new technology, right? Like I sit in, like I talked about, I sit in live demos a lot of days a week where I've got, anywhere from 5 to 15 people in front of me, and they're all using Copilot for the first time in some cases, or some people are experienced users. It doesn't always work 100% of the time. As you well know, live demos always have their issues. So it's not a perfect tool, right? These things aren't solved. But one of the things I also hammer on is like, this is the worst this technology will ever be. It's only getting better from here, right? And so there are things that don't work or didn't work a couple of weeks ago that work now. And it's been really amazing. Like, I was using ChatGPT the night it came out. I was in college at that point. And I'd actually been using the GPT models before they had ChatGPT, that interaction layer, using them in the OpenAI sandbox, using them via API. And I am not a coder by training. So I was struggling through. And then ChatGPT came out and I was like, oh, this can help me write the code to interact with the models, to train the models, to do these custom trainings. So I have been using it from day one, and it's been amazing to watch things change and improve and evolve over time. And so I think that's the other thing. If you've had a bad experience, that's not to say you're using it wrong, right? Like, there is a lot of, it's not skill, but like, prompting is something that takes practice and takes repetition. But if you've had a bad experience, it might be time to go back and try it again, because these tools are only getting better.
Yeah. Where do people, like, what is like step one? And then where do people either stub their toe on it? And maybe they stubbed it. Maybe it is they just didn't give it enough chance, or they left it and they left it forever because they had a bad experience. But you're sitting down with people, or what are the aha moments, or what is like step one that you're like shocked that people don't know?
Yeah, it's fast. So there's a lot of different perspectives that come in. I've had everybody sit down and go, I don't like this. I don't trust it. I don't really want to be here. And I don't think these technologies are good things. All the way up to people who are like, hey, I use it for everything every day. I use it all the time. I probably put stuff I shouldn't into it. I'm all in. So I have gotten to see all experiences. I think some of the common trip ups, a lot of it's around prompting, and people don't necessarily know how to interact with the tool, which is completely fair, because it is in some ways a new way of working. In some ways, the beauty of a natural language tool is that you just get to talk to it like you would talk to anyone. Now, where it differentiates is that when you are talking to somebody, you don't want to be a micromanager. So you generally want to tell them, like, here's what I want. I'm not going to tell you exactly how to do it, because that's excessive and unnecessary. And that's when somebody starts to feel micromanaged. When somebody comes to you and say, hey, I want you to do this thing. Here's exactly how you're going to do it. Here's exactly the steps you need to take. And you go, okay, well, fine. You've just reduced me to a robot, right? I'm just going to go hit the buttons you tell me to hit. That's not really worth very much. So with AI, it can be very helpful to be more specific. So in prompting, like, let me give you actually a helpful example that I think has really driven this home for a lot of people. So I'm a good neighbor. I was heading to the store the other day, pulled out, neighbor's mowing his grass. And I said, hey, Jim, anything I can grab you from the store? I'm going. And he said, yes, actually, I need toothpaste. Weird request. I was expecting like milk or eggs, right? But he said toothpaste. I said, cool, no problem. I got you. Get to the store. There's a row of toothpaste. I have like 55 options. I have no idea what he wants. So I grabbed what I use, which is like Colgate bubblegum, and brought it back. And he said, hey, that's not what I wanted. So now let's reimagine that scenario, which may or may not be slightly fabricated. And imagine that he says, hey, Will, my wife and I are going to Europe next week. We both have sensitive teeth and we hate the flavor bubblegum. Now I go back to the store, and when I go to pick out toothpaste, I know I'm looking for travel size. I know I'm looking for 2 of them. I know I'm looking for Sensodyne, and I know I'm looking for mint. I got no smarter. I gained no more capabilities. I have no more ability than I did when he asked me the first time, but I have now returned to him with a drastically sort of better response in this case, or sort of request fulfillment. So that's one thing to be really helpful, is like, a lot of times it is just about how you ask the question. And it's also about getting over the hump and just trying stuff. One of the other things that we very frequently say in these labs is like, you're not going to break it. Ask the question, right? Worst case, it'll give you a bad answer. That happens. You'll be all right. And even beyond that, you can ask it, how do I achieve this? So I've had scenarios where I'm like, I don't even know where to start here. You can ask Copilot and say, hey, how do I achieve this thing? Talk me through it step by step. How do I write a prompt that's going to get me this? And you can just sort of like brain dump give it a whole bunch of information, say, help me write a fantastic prompt that will get this response from an AI. And it will help you. It writes very, very good prompts. So again, a lot of it goes back to just dive in, right? Just start somewhere. Start with one use case and you'll start to see some more. But I think that's the answer. And that toothpaste example, I think, has really been helpful for me and for some of the other people to unlock, like, sometimes it just takes a better set of instructions, a better prompt, and giving a little more specificity.
You know, it's been eye-opening to me just over the past like few months here, and I'm sure most people got there way before I did. But and I was thinking about it when you're saying, "Hey, just help me write the prompt."
Yeah,
is what these LLMs do is they give you access to the world's resident experts on demand, the top code writer, right? And it might be a little off. It might not be absolutely perfect. But
so even at the best, you have a graduate level, let's say, and most things, like, you can pull a graduate level thinker in just about any field, on demand. Yep,
including
which for you might not be special, right? Like, you get to talk to really brilliant people all day, so you probably have somebody in your phone where I can call the most brilliant person in X and the most brilliant person in Y. But for those of us who are stuck out in the cold that don't necessarily have, my friends are very smart and talented, but don't necessarily have that Rolodex, right? Like, it's incredible to get to say. I'll dive into one quick use case here. I don't want to cut you off, but one of the things and one of the reasons that I had to push this was we have something called Research Agent, which is really fascinating. I don't know if you've ever used Deep Research or Research Agent, any of these, but it's a sort of toggle that you can turn on that says, hey, I want to go deep here. And so you'll ask it a question and it'll come back and ask you anywhere from like 2 to 5 or 6 questions, clarifying questions. Say, what do you really want? Dive back in with me. And then it's going to go for anywhere from 5 to 30 minutes. And it's going to read a whole bunch of web pages, anywhere from, like, I've seen it go for 2 or 3 in some cases, all the way up to like 25 or 30 different web pages that it's going to run through, pull in, and then it's going to give you a research report at the end, like pages long. Most of the time, I would say it's like graduate level. It's really good. This is valuable for all kinds of things. So I was with the, I won't name the specific organization, but a large university. I was with their CIO and their CTO the other day. And we were talking about AI transformation, and they were curious about this Research Agent. And so I said, all right, Research Agent, I want a decade by decade history of blank university. And it came back and said, all right, do you want, how do you want to present it? Do you want it in a timeline? Do you want it to focus on enrollment or historical events or statistics? How do you want this focused? Do you want any like big milestones called out? And I said, no, go for it. Do whatever. Give me a timeline. And it spent 30 minutes, which luckily we had other things to talk about. So it wasn't just sitting there staring at the screen, watching it load for 30 minutes. And it came back with an incredibly in-depth 5 or 6 page report. And we had one guy who'd been with that university for, I think, 30 something years. And he was like, okay, yeah, I remember that. Like, that's good. That's good. That's good. And we Googled a couple of them. And the other interesting thing was he said, I only want it to use University of X's website to pull this back. Don't go to anybody else. And we looked through the sources and it had done just that. The other interesting use case was my mother's a prolific gardener and she had a tree fall at her house. And so one of her gardens that went from full shade to full sun. And she goes like, I don't know if you've looked up, but this entire neighborhood is nothing but trees. I have only ever gardened in the shade. I don't know what I'm doing. So I said, well, like, this was right when Research Agent came out. And I was like, I got this cool thing I can play with. It's not public yet, but like, let's try it. And so we punched in and said, hey, she's in Northern Virginia. Here's the soil type. Here's what she's looking for. I have this full sun garden. What should I plant? It needs to be deer resistant. And it came back and said, all right, like, what's your soil type? Do you want like a ground cover versus a bush versus plants? Do you want annuals, perennials, whatever? It went through, thought for like 15, 20 minutes, came back and said, all right, cool. Here's a list. Here's all the different plants. And it had gone to a bunch of Virginia botany sites and other places that were localized and said, all right, well, here's what you might want to do. And here is actually probably like a good set you could do, because you probably want to stagger your blooms so that your whole garden doesn't bloom at once and then the whole rest of the year it's dead. So it came through. And again, like, none of that is unknown information, right? Like, this is not summoning knowledge from the nether realm, but it's stuff that would take a hell of a lot of time if I was to sit down or she was to sit down to go through this. And it's thinking of things that we wouldn't necessarily. It's like if you got a graduate level, botanist or somebody who's really had a deep expertise and they're on demand. So I think that's a great way to think about it, is that you have the intelligence of like a pretty high level person in just about any field on demand. It's just about asking the right question.
Yeah. And the coolest thing to me, though, is you can also ask it to, be the best prompt writer in the world and help me write a prompt to do this. And it will, it even helps you do the thing that you need to do the best.
Yes. So it's really impressive. It's really impressive in that way. One thing I do want to touch on, and yeah, I'm sure you have more questions, so I don't want to steal too much of the time. But
we might end up just going 2 podcasts. That's what
absolutely. We can absolutely come back for a part 2. I am more than happy. As you can tell, this is something I will talk about ad nauseum. Like the other thing that we talk about is, and I think you sort of already started to pick up on this intuitively, the human doesn't go out of the loop, right? Like one thing we talk about a lot in our experiences is minutes on mission. So some of the use cases that we talk about specifically are like the UK government was really ahead on AI, and they said, we want to get ahead of this. We want to dive in. We want to go deep. And so they actually ended up signing a 5-year partnership with Microsoft to deploy AI and become a world leader in this. And what they decided to do, which I think was a really interesting strategy, was push it down to the cities and the boroughs and the councils, the lowest levels of government, the most localized governments in the UK, rather than having it up. They obviously use it at the federal level, but they said our first deployment should be at the ground level, because they have the most interaction with the citizens. We want to see if there's benefit there. And so I'll just jump into one of the use cases they had that I think was really powerful was, I want to say it was Torfaen, but I don't remember the exact borough council, that deals with children going into the foster care system. And, I'm sure you've had like a podcast experience where you start asking a question, it kind of gets meandering, like halfway through, you're like, I kind of just wish I could take that whole thing back and just like start again. If you're in a podcast, that's unfortunate. If you're dealing with a child who's been through a traumatic experience and is going into the foster care system, like that's far more problematic. And so they really stress preparation for these meetings. If you are going to meet the child, you need to be ready. And so they, that was one of the use cases they actually came to us with and said, hey, is there any way to have Copilot help us for this? And we said, absolutely. So what we have is, and this is out of the box Copilot, you give it a fairly long prompt that says, hey, here's who I am. I'm a social worker. I'm meeting with this person. These are my goals. It goes, okay, cool. Comes back, here's all the case details. And again, because you're in your Microsoft secure tenant, you don't need to worry about this. You have access to that data and you don't have to worry about where that data is going. You can pull in those case details. And then you can say, all right, here's the specific instance I'm dealing with. So I'm calling, let's say, the foster mother. The child has had some trouble at school and we're worried about some behavioral things. And we want to talk to her about this and understand what's happening. And then because you're using an LLM and you have a probabilistic, not a deterministic system, you can give it a sort of behavioral envelope and say, this is an intensely personal and private person. If the questions get too intrusive, get too aggressive, say end call and pretend this person hung up on me. So you can now go a step deeper. Then you can go into a 30-minute role play back and forth with Copilot and then say end role play. And Copilot's going to come back and say, here's what you did well. Here's where you can improve. Here are some questions that you might have asked, something you could have gone deeper in, some information you missed. And then actually here is like the rubric that you are sort of critiqued on. Like here is what the standards you're held to. We can score you on each of those standards. And so this is a place where like, and this is one of the reasons I love this experience or this particular example. Like the idea that you should practice for a meeting is not new, right? This isn't something AI came up with. But the way they did this before was that you would grab your coworker, you would give them a case file, they'd scan through it for like 30 seconds, and then you'd say, go. And you would start talking. They wouldn't know that many of the case details. Maybe they remember some names and they're going to lose it throughout. And as they go, they're going to fall back on like their standard sort of role play tropes. And both of you are now preparing for one meeting that only one of you is going to be in. With Copilot, you now have a much more personalized, much more customized experience. And you and your coworker can both be independently preparing for meetings. So going back to that minutes on mission, you can now double the throughput there. And so it's a lot of these use cases where like, hey, this isn't some world changing, like groundbreaking innovation, but AI and Copilot are able to make this experience far more valuable and really put minutes back on mission to actually make a difference in what these people are trying to do. Like they have an incredible mission that they're trying to achieve, and we can give them more time to do that with Copilot. And like, that's a really incredible takeaway. So I think that's one valuable takeaway and I should have answered this earlier. Like that's one of the things that I think people can get a little hung up on with AI is they think they need some world changing use case. And people are like, oh, either I just like ask it to summarize emails and use like the most basic case, which is still valuable, but or I need some like crazy use case where I'm pulling in 85 disparate streams of data into one thing and having it summarized into a report and then send an email off to 11 people. There are some really sort of pedestrian use cases where you can just leverage this and really crank the value out of it. So I think that's one other call out I would make in terms of how people are using these tools and where they might be getting hung up is in the complexity of use case they think they need to pursue.
Yeah, I mean, in that scenario, if I flip it to the business mindset, which is I need to go give a presentation to the board or the executive team. And traditionally, I would spend, hours and hours in a week trying to pull together, analyze all the data from all the spreadsheets,
Yes.
everything they'd seen before, charts, graphs. And in this case, I can say, analyze it, right? I can just pull in, like you were saying, pull in all this data and take a look at it and then return to me X, Y, Z. And the interesting thing is then you can keep reiterating, and nobody, like if you were to, like in your example of, hey, I'd have to micromanage somebody, right? Because the same as like if you ask somebody to go, hey, pull this data. Oh, wait, I need another piece. And they go do it. Wait, sorry, I forgot. I need one more piece. Oh, I was reading this. I need another piece. That person's
and it's in 5 different places, and it's like nobody's winning. That's and we talk about this, like the output
but Copilot
is
doesn't care. No, Copilot doesn't care.
Exactly. Well, and the output is useful. Like this is one of the things that we talk about is like the output is useful. The process is not, right? Like having, we also talk about one of the other use cases the UK had was meeting minutes, where they had somebody who was spending an hour per meeting because you got to go listen through the meeting, take notes, take it all into this particular format. Now we can say, all right, let's just download the transcript, dump the transcript and say, here's the transcript, here's the format we need it in, overlay those. And now the person spends 10 minutes reviewing. I'm sure we've all been note takers, like at some point or another. It's not a particularly fun job. Having well-written notes come out of a meeting is a valuable thing. The process of creating those notes is not a particularly valuable process, right? So like that's where minutes on mission, right? Now that person, instead of spending an hour pulling those meeting minutes together, can review them for 10 minutes, say, this is good, I sign off. Again, humans not coming out of the loop, and then spend those next 50 minutes doing something that is of value. And that is good for the organization. That is good for the person. And like, this is one of the really interesting things we see. And I'm sorry to run over your point, but like, this is one of the really interesting things we see we talk about these frontier firms, which are the ones that are really leaning forward on AI and agents. We actually see people's fear of job loss from AI go down when the organization adopts more AI and really adopts it well. And that, I think, in part comes from, if you are somebody who feels like a bunch of your time is being spent on things that are not ultimately valuable, that's not a good feeling. You don't feel secure in your role. You don't feel like the organization values you. If you get to offload all of the monotony, all of the stuff that isn't really high value, and spend more time doing things that are uniquely valuable, that's a much better, much more secure feeling. So I think there's actually like sort of an unintuitive shift there, where as people are able to push away the non-valuable work, they feel more valuable, and that actually decreases their fear of job loss. And it shows both they win, the organization wins. Like that was one of the really sort of interesting breakthroughs for me, because that's obviously something we think about a lot, is like, what is the jobs perspective to this? And that was really informative to me, understanding that. And I absolutely feel it in my own life, right? Like I used to spend a lot of time preparing for meetings with people. And it's like, all right, cool, I'll Google the person, I'll read a bunch of bios. Now Copilot can go out, grab their bios, pull it back for me. I can review just the bullet points, because I can tell Copilot, here's what I'm doing with them. Copilot, you know me, you know what I do. Tell me what's relevant, right? Sometimes stuff is relevant. They may have led a technology, innovation a couple of years ago. That's relevant to me. I don't need to know if they won a Scholastic Book Fair in 2006. That's less relevant to me. So it can go through, and instead of me having to read and digest all this information, I get the important stuff, and I get to spend more time face to face with people, right? More face time, less screen time. Like there's some really material takeaways that really change the way that I interact with my work through Copilot.
This has been awesome, Will. We're going to have a follow-up.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, this has been absolutely fantastic. I'm just trying to wrap my head around, the Copilot piece, how I'm not using it enough, or how I should be leveraging it better. And I think the whole audience is
next time you're in DC, give me a shout. I'll bring you into the lab. We'll spend a couple hours, and it'll be good. Yeah.
Who can get into that? Are you strictly, you said, with the federal government?
We're focused on federal, and it's fairly narrow. It's not an experience that we sort of publish, or there's not a public sign up. It's through some particular avenues that we can talk about, but I can certainly make an exception for you.
Okay.
So we'll get you in there for sure.
That would be absolutely awesome. Well, thanks again so much for your time today.
Of course.
Thanks everybody for listening in. With that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Digital Deep Dive.